to welcome Maia, and she's a founder and director of Aleph Accessibility and a certified web accessibility specialist. With her deep technical expertise and practical insights, Maia has a talent to translate complex concepts into clear and easily digestible content. And we're so excited to hear from you tonight. Welcome, Maia. So now the floor is yours. You can start sharing.
And you can see mine now. Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks so much. Thanks everybody for joining. Thanks for that great introduction. And yeah, let's just jump right in. We're like a decent sized group. So, I have a presentation and slides and all that stuff, but, having conversation and discussion is always really welcome. So feel free to jump up and say things or use the Slido. And yeah, we'll get into questions because that's really the best part of it all. So before we jump into talking about accessibility, I have a little quiz for us. So if your camera is on, you can like raise your hand or you can write in the chat what your answer is to the little quiz. So the first, so it's all have you ever. So have you ever used your keyboard to tab around a screen? Who here has done that?
Okay.
Yeah, number of us, yeah. How about who here is guilty of having multiple tabs open in a browser? Who's guilty? Who's guilty? Yeah, yeah, okay. What about using subtitles on videos? Who here watches somehow for some reason things that just sound you can hear it better when you have subtitles on, right? Um, and anybody here ever found a form difficult to understand? Yeah, yeah. I think we all have our own horror stories for that. So if you've answered yes to any of these questions, which I believe we all did, you've benefited from web accessibility. So let's go briefly what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about what accessibility is, just so we're all on the same page. And we're going to talk about who exactly it benefits. We already know it's everybody in this room, but we'll go dig into that a little bit deeper. Then we'll talk about some numbers and stats, and those are the points that those are your talking points when you talk to other people and you're trying to tell them why accessibility is really cool and interesting. Those are your talking points. And then finally, we're going to get into some practical hands-on stuff as well. Sounds good? You don't have a choice, so so before we get into it, Theora gave me a great intro. I'll just explain a little bit of who I am. So I'm a certified web accessibility specialist. Basically, it means I know what I'm talking about. So much so that I decided to start my own company where I do audits and consulting and training, all to do with digital accessibility. My background is as a developer. I did that for a number of years as a front end dev before moving into accessibility full time. But I do have experience in like cross functional teams. So I've worked closely with BAs as well as designers and testers and all that kind of stuff. So accessibility really does touch all the job roles. And part of my job is understanding, the different ways that we interact with each other and how accessibility plays into all that. So that's a little bit about me. So let's talk about web accessibility and what exactly it is. I like to compare it to the built environment. So just like there are ways that we can construct buildings that are more or less accessible, the same is true with the web. So if we think about a building, for example, we can have ramps outside as opposed to just stairs, or we have elevators or signage with braille on it. Those are all things that we take into consideration and we put into the construction of a building to make it more accessible. The same is true with online stuff. We think about things ahead of time or in addition, and we make sure that we include that in the things that we're building. Just like the built environment, digital accessibility is also easier when it's thought of ahead of time. So if you think about a building, for example, where it was constructed with multiple floors, but they forgot to put an elevator in, and then they have to retrofit putting an elevator in, or even the stairs outside, right? And you have to retrofit putting a ramp in. You can think about how costly that will be, to put that in terms of money, but also in terms of time, in terms of pulling like stakeholders back into the project that was already finished. it's at this stage where we get a lot of those questions of, well, who's using elevators anyway? How many patrons of this building are actually going to benefit from the elevator? Do we really need to do it? So that's why it's great to have accessibility considerations from the beginning of a project as much as we can. And the same is true with digital as well. And just like the built environment, we can think of pretty easily how, an elevator or a ramp, multiple people benefited from it, not just who we might initially think of, somebody who has mobility difficulties or is in a wheelchair, right? But also somebody who is using a stroller, or maybe they broke their leg, or they're just carrying heavy things. Having a ramp can be easier for all sorts of people to enter a building. And the same is true with digital accessibility as well. There's, an initial group that we might think of who benefits from accessibility, but really the group, as we think about it more, it expands more and more, and there's lots of people who actually benefit from the improvements that we make for accessibility. So when we're talking about digital accessibility, we're actually talking about a whole bunch of different things. Just like we're talking about ramps and elevators and Braille, those are all different aspects of the physical world. When it comes to the digital world, we're talking about things like color and images and videos and code and forms and errors and all that kind of stuff. So there's a whole bunch of different things within accessibility that we're talking about. Cool. Any thoughts or questions so far? All right, we'll steamroll ahead. So, and that's yeah. I'll just pause for questions, but you don't have to ask a question. All right, let's talk about the who behind web accessibility. So we already, when we think about web accessibility and digital accessibility, there's those who we might traditionally think of, and they definitely benefit from digital accessibility. So that's, your blind screen reader user, or your low vision user, or somebody with motor impairments, all that kind of stuff. The person that you're thinking of in your head, that person is definitely like a person who benefits from web accessibility. But we can expand our thinking beyond that as well. So there's people without disability who don't necessarily identify with disabilities, right? New technologies, for example, like our smartphones, we all use smartphones, I assume, were actually created as an accessibility technology. And now it's universal, right? Same with speech to text technologies and Siris and, all that talking to our phones. Those were accessibility technologies that we've adopted widely for everybody, regardless of what your ability is. So, even if we don't identify as having a disability, we still benefit from good UX design, good code practice, good and new technologies and innovations. So it's really like a lot more than just those with disabilities. There's also temporary or situational disabilities. What is a temporary disability? You could put it in the chat or say it loud. What do you think is a temporary disability?
Injuries.
Injury? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, for example, I am a right-handed person, and so I use my right hand to navigate all of my technology. And if I broke my right hand or my right arm, the way that I interact with my technology is going to be different, and it's going to be, frankly, more challenging for me. And in that scenario, that's a temporary disability. Hopefully, I'll recover from it. But it's put me in a position where, being really fine-tuned about using a cursor in just exactly a certain way is going to be more difficult for me during that period of time. And a situational disability is in a similar way that we might not necessarily identify it as a disability per se, but being like, for example, in a loud environment or maybe a quiet environment, right? You're at the library and you want to watch a video, but you don't want to make it too loud. So you put it on with subtitles and you put it on mute. And so that's the environment impacting the way that you can use technology. And it's also an accessibility improvement that has been made. And so you're benefiting from that accessibility improvement. So again, we're thinking about different ways that disability and our situation and the way that we use technology interacts with accessibility. And then finally, just the last group that I wanted to talk about was the older population. So 46% of people age 60 plus have a disability. That's a lot. And that number just goes up as we age. And it makes sense too, if you think about it, as we grow older, just our eyesight gets weaker, our dexterity gets weaker. It's just a natural part of aging. And as a result, we want to make sure that we're having good color contrast and being able to allow zooming to happen so that as our eyesight gets weaker and, we need to look at our phone from like a distance, we're able to do the accommodations that we need to make sure that we can use our technology as we normally do, and just seamlessly and easily. Okay, so those are different ways of thinking about accessibility and who benefits from it. So let's talk about some stats, and these are like the hard facts about accessibility. So those are the talking points that you go when you're having those conversations with people and you're trying to tell them how important and how much you love accessibility. So 1 in 4 New Zealanders have a disability. So put that in another context, that's 1.1 million people. Put in another context, that's the entire population of Auckland. So if you think of a scenario where if you're at your workplace or your potential workplace and, they say, oh, we don't really cater to Auckland. We cater to the rest of the country, but we don't really care if Auckland is not buying our good or something. Or if, a server goes down or something, a technology, like a glitch happened and it only affects the Auckland area. And everyone's just like, it's okay. Don't worry about it. We don't need to get that fixed, get that, put it back up. That's a huge amount of people. And we would never think that, right? And that's the number of people that we're talking about who tick the box that say, yes, I have a disability. Because that number is a baseline minimum. Because what that doesn't include is the things that we talked about, right? Those temporary or situational disabilities. Like this number is based off of a survey. So somebody who's ticking a box saying, yes, I identify as having a disability. For example, how many of us, either us ourselves or know people who are like, I'm not diagnosed ADHD, but I'm pretty sure that I have ADHD. The more we learn about neurodiversity, the more we realize just how, prominent it is. And it's not necessarily diagnosed. And even for the people who do have a diagnosis, they might not tick off that box that says, yes, I have a disability, right? They just don't identify that way. That's true for people who are deaf. They feel like they're part of a unique subculture rather than being disabled. So this number is our baseline number when we're thinking about who our users are and how accessibility is impacting our users. Is this number surprising to anybody? Is this more or less than you are? Yeah. And these people come with money as well. So the disabled community represents $5.6 billion per year of disposable income in New Zealand. And companies that are mature with accessibility report 28% higher revenues than those that are not mature with accessibility. And again, we can kind of, understand the logic behind that, right? With better accessibility comes better UX and user experiences. It's easier to use products and therefore, go through carts and signups and all that kind of stuff. SEO is better. Users who are disabled are what's called sticky. They're sticky users, as in they stick to a client, a customer. If you think about, trying to use go grocery shopping online, right? And if you're constantly used to facing barriers, and you finally find a grocery store where you can easily do your grocery shopping, you're going to keep doing grocery shopping there, right? And so in that way, disabled users are loyal users, and that makes sense when it comes to that money and that revenue aspect of business. We're not just here for business, though, and not just here for money. It's good for user experiences as well. 71% of users with disabilities click away. So, we're improving those click away rates and just helping users do better. And organizations, 63% of organizations believe that improved accessibility means improved UX as well. So again, it's that idea of, improving the situation for people who are disabled, but also people who we might not traditionally think of disabled, and people who are just, we're all just going about our day to day, right? And so we're all benefiting from accessibility in all sorts of different ways. Finally, just talking about the legal aspect of it, because people do ask. So the government in New Zealand is required to meet accessibility standards. It's not extended to the private sector, although that being said, if you work at a company that provides services to government, then they are required to provide accessible services. And then internationally, where the standards are higher, we're seeing increased lawsuits around the world with tighter regulations. With the demand for meeting accessibility standards. So if you're working at a company or you're looking to work at a company that is international, either they are international or they're planning on going international, they're going to need to meet accessibility standards. But let's talk about you, because this is what we were talking about this whole time, or what the title of the talk is about: standing out. How do we stand out in this competitive job market that we're in? And I think accessibility is a really great way of doing that. From the hiring side, we're seeing a greater demand for it in that business aspect. So things like better revenues and UX and stuff like that, but also those lawsuits and the government requirements. So the expectation and the need for accessibility is growing. So if you're able to present yourself as a candidate who already has accessibility skills, or at least has accessibility knowledge and is on your journey of learning accessibility, and you can bring other people along that journey with you, that's going to be a way for you to stand out. All things being equal for you and that other candidate, that's a way for you to stand out from them. And that's true in the public sector, in the private sector, agency, product, anything that really any industry, we're seeing that it will be really beneficial as a way to stand out. So how do you stand out? How do you go, let's learn about accessibility and show your skills? And so let's dive into the practical tips that I have for you of how we can implement accessibility today, how we can learn accessibility. So I have 3 tips for you. So the first one is to start learning. You got to start, and you got to keep learning. I can tell you that there's so much to learn about accessibility, and really the most important thing is just start. So when you're thinking about where you want to learn or what you want to learn, I would say pick a few resources, like 2 to 3 sources, and stick to those. Information overload can be a real thing when it comes to accessibility. Pick reputable sources. Bali put some resources in the chat, so that's perfectly timed. So the W3C, for example, is a really good resource. They have resources from coding examples to like empathy stories and stories about people with disabilities and how they benefit from it. So that's a really great resource. And WebAIM does the same thing. Digital.gov.nz is a good resource for New Zealand specific rules. The rules are the same across the board, but if you want just like that unique New Zealand perspective, and they put a lot of effort into explaining things like what is a button and what is a link and when do we use the different ones, and explaining it in plain language. And it's organized also by job role and stuff as well. So it's like good for BAs, good for other people as well. You can focus in on your job role. And I put Aleph Accessibility, which is my company. We have a resource page. We have content there as well that I think you can find useful as well. So I would say pick some reputable resources and stick to those, and you'll go pretty far with those ones. How to learn about accessibility? Like I was saying, there's so much to learn, and as you dive in, you're gonna realize just how much, and I do this full time and every day, and there's a list of things that I still have to learn. So what I want to encourage you is to not feel like you need to be the expert and not feel like you have to know everything, but really getting started somewhere is the most valuable thing. So pick those resources that you speaks to you. Pick formats that work for you. So if you are a reader, then pick reading resources. If you're a video watcher, do videos. People are doing podcasts about accessibility. So if that's your venue, then do that. Do the thing that works well for how you like to learn. Pace yourself as well, the other thing that I said. So pick the things you want to learn and just go about it. Honestly, learning anything is better than learning nothing, is what I would say. And in terms of what to learn, sometimes people ask that question. I would say that the things that are really valuable is always knowing the who and why of accessibility. And a lot of things talk about that, and they give you some talking points. And those are great when you're having conversations with people as well. I would focus on things that are relevant to your job role. That's always a good way to hone in so that you're not like reading code when you don't know how code and keeping being from overwhelmed. And then focusing on certain areas of accessibility can also be a strategy. So also bear in mind, these aren't things that you have to do all of these things. These are just ideas of like, you can focus on just BA stuff, or you can focus on just the why, or you can focus on specific areas of accessibility. Like, I want to learn about keyboard accessibility, or I want to learn about a screen reader and how screen reader works. And so you're going to focus on that. So, just hone in and pick an area that you want to work on. And then you kind of go from there is what my recommendation would be in terms of what to learn. I'm just reading the, okay. Yeah, so step number one is to learn some stuff, and that's going to be your best tool to be able to go into the world and feel confident about it. And you're going to learn, you're going to keep learning. It's going to be going on forever. The second tip that I have is about building community. And this one's kind of maybe surprising to some people, but accessibility can be difficult and can be overwhelming, there's a lot to learn. And so building community is really a great way to stick to accessibility, to remember what your values are, to be motivated, learning from others. And, what I find about community is that seeing other people excited about it makes me excited. So things like this, I'm doing accessibility every day. And sometimes, you're sitting there being like, I hope people find this valuable, but I'm not really sure. And then I come here where there's a whole group of almost 20 people, and, everybody's here to learn about accessibility, and because you want to implement accessibility. And that to me is inspiring and encouraging. And, the conversation that we're going to have afterwards, that's really invigorating. And that's the thing that's going to keep the momentum going. And it allows you, to like celebrate success and also make things a little bit easier as well. So, you're going to learn about that thing. I'm going to learn about this thing. Then let's come together and let's teach each other, and that way you don't have to learn everything, but you know who you can tap shoulders on and lean on in that way. When it comes to building community, you can find it anywhere, really. If you're not in the job, if you're not in the workforce right now, the students here and just people in the group here, like keep the conversations going. Make sure that you're reading regularly. It doesn't have to be that regular, but like every fortnight, once a month kind of thing, having just that touching point to make sure that it's still like top of mind. People have different job roles and stuff. We do have a meetup. This is like my weird plug for the meetup. If you find this really fun and interesting, then we have one tomorrow, actually, in person in Wellington, but also it'll be streamed online. So that's a great way. I started that meetup specifically because I wanted community, to be able to keep going and to find inspiration and enthusiasm with other people. So I would say that is my second tip. And then finally, it's similar to the first one, is that you remember that you don't have to be an expert when you're coming together with people. It's really good to just come with other people and see where they're at. And you'll see that you know more than you think that you know. Okay. And then my third tip is to practice. So accessibility is one of those things where there's a lot of theory, but then it's about when we put it into practice, when it's like immediately is when it starts to get complicated. And that's the thing, the practice part, that's the thing that you're going to be able to use on your CVs. So, the learning is the thing that you're going to be doing so that you can like upscale. The community is the thing that you're going to have to keep your motivation going. And the practice is going to be the hard skills where you can actually feel confident that you have the skills so that you can put it on your CV. So taking that learning into that real world context, you can, if you're like in the workforce, you can, do it on the job, and, build culture, and bring other people around you as well as you're practicing it in the real world. What I think is really beneficial about it is building that confidence and demonstrating those skills, like I was saying, right? So as you're doing it, you're not just reading and theorizing about it, but you actually have it in practice. And you can see where your strengths are and where, areas that you want to improve in. And, even what you learned from last week to this week, like, oh, I now know how, to keyboard through this website. Last week I didn't even know, and I downloaded this tool that, last week I didn't even know, and last month I didn't know, and now I do. Um, yeah, so a way to how to practice, I would say, is examining websites and assessing their accessibility. So you have been doing your readings, or watching your videos or listening to your podcast, whatever works for you in terms of reading, learning and stuff. And then, so go to a website that you go to regularly, whether that's Instagram or Facebook, or whether it's like, your university's website, or whatever website, the grocery store, whatever it is, and just have a play around and see what you learned, and see if you can apply what you learned. So whether that's you learned about keyboard accessibility or color, or you heard a podcast about that where they told the story about somebody, and then you go to that website and you say, okay, well, what would it be like if I was that person, and how would I experience this website? So, you don't have to be in a controlled environment to practice accessibility. You can practice it anywhere all the time. And then what will end up happening is that you can't turn it off. And so you will start seeing websites and you will not be able to not see the thing. So you can look forward to that. If you are a student, or you are working, you can practice in your job, like make a feature or write the requirements. It's fine that you don't know everything. Again, you don't have to be an expert, but even just the thinking of it and being like, so I'm writing the requirements for this, or, I'm providing the analysis on this feature, what is the accessibility angle that I should be taking from this? I actually have no idea. Let me go do some research about navigation or about maps, and let me see what kind of accessibility considerations there are. That could be a really good launching pad of what should I be learning, is the thing that you're currently working on, is a good thing to start learning about. Yeah. Cool. So, three tips that we talked about. One is to start and then continue learning. The second is building community, and finally is practicing. So those are the things that are going to get you going, keep you going, and then being able to demonstrate the skills that you've developed along that way. So the last thing, I'll kind of spread through that, I guess. But the last thing that I'll say about accessibility is we focus a lot on progress, not perfection. Accessibility is one of those, like one of the few areas where a small change really has a big impact. And where, again, you don't have to be an expert of things, and you can just make a small tweak in the things that you're doing, and really having that big impact on users in a really real, tangible way, without, finishing a degree and finishing, seeing something to like fully to the end, and so I think for that reason, that progress, not perfection, the small changes, I think that that's a really good reason as well to focus on accessibility and make that something that you're really carrying the torch for, and implementing for in the work that you're doing. So yeah, so that's what I have for you. Well, I know we have a question, like a nice, healthy question period. And I have my contact info on the screen as well, and then also the meetup as well. And so, like, yeah, let's talk, let's engage, let's talk about accessibility.
Awesome. Thank you, Maya, very much. Within like 30, 25 minutes, you can be able to squeeze in such a great, insightful amount of content like so. It's like, wow, in my brain. It's like it's already accessible. And at the same time, lots of things to think about and lots of food for thought. And I was like thinking, it's not just about web digital accessibility technical stuff, but it's also about like empathy, how we can create and build up a community supportive in a very competitive world these days. Yeah, and by that, I will share my screen, and I think we have lots of good questions, very insightful to dig deep into this topic. So I would like to ask Bali to allow me share the screen as well, please?
Let me know if I need to do something as well. I can stop
Will you
share.
stop? Yes. And can we see my screen? Oops. Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I can see here lots of practical and insight. I will just go ahead and read out the questions for you, Maya.
Sure.
So, which tool can one use for implementation of accessibility for practical example?
So it depends on what you want to do in terms of the practical thing. So one thing that you can do is tabbing around with your keyboard. So that's a way that a lot of users use like interact with technology. So you're simply like your keyboard. There are free screen readers as well. So you can either download in your browser an extension that will act as a screen reader, or like NVDA. I'll type it in the chat. It's literally just letters NVDA. Screen reader. So that's on Windows. And Apple is well, the iPhone is VoiceOver. Um, but anyway, so NVDA, for example, is on Windows. It's a free screen reader, and you can turn it on and you can play around and just get the experience of what it's like. I mentioned phones. All phones have screen readers built into it as well, so you can turn on your screen reader on your phone and give it a play. I recommend making sure that you know how to turn it off, because it changes the functionality of your phone itself. So like the actual interactions that you have on your phone will be different than what you're used to, because the screen reader is in play. So just make sure that you know how to turn it off is my recommendation. Otherwise, I'm going to be talking at you while you're trying to figure it out. Yeah, so a screen reader is a great tool to play with and practice and develop that empathy, and develop an understanding of yeah, like the how accessibility works on the web. Other
Mm,
tools that you can use are things like color contrast checkers, and yeah, and there's like some extensions as well that'll show like tab stops and headings and things like that as well. Those are other tools that you can use.
great tips. So the next question is about AI. Probably tomorrow you will have an event to talk about this topic, but maybe just quickly, how should the concept of digital accessibility evolve given the pervasiveness of AI in the work environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that AI is a tool like any other tool. And I think more than anything, whether the concept of digital accessibility needs to evolve, I actually think it just needs to be persistent, that we just need to remember that AI doesn't solve all of our problems. It's not getting rid of all of our jobs. And, especially like sophisticated jobs that require brain power. Um, it's AI is a tool, and you remember that it's not going to it's also biased, and it doesn't just naturally create accessible content because it's based on content that already exists in the world, and that content is not accessible. So that's the content that's being created by AI. So when we're using AI, we want to be still remembering the things and the principles that we're knowing about digital accessibility, and making sure that we're applying those concepts to the things that we churn out. So something, AI is whips out like a description, like a requirements document, for example. You still want to be using your BA hat, and reading through it with your lens on a whole bunch of other things that you're going at it, as well as accessibility, thinking about, okay, well, how is this talking about accessibility? Is it considering accessibility even in the first place? So I think there's definitely a lot of room when it comes to AI, that we still need to be making sure that we are guiding this technology in a way that is still accessible.
Yeah, definitely. And will be very interesting to learn more about this tomorrow as well. So,
Yeah, the topic of the meetup tomorrow is all about AI. So if you could come in person, that's great. If you can only join online, that's also really great, and you'll get more content about it then. Yeah.
awesome. So, got like very interesting questions here about COVID-19. So, how has the role of web accessibility evolved before, during, and after the COVID pandemic?
Yeah,
Wow.
so COVID was a really interesting time that we all know, in the terms of the digital world, it showed us just how much we can do online that we thought we couldn't. What ended up happening during COVID was a lot of, like, let's take universities, for example, shifted really quickly to moving online. And when they did that shift really quickly, they actually didn't consider accessibility. So a lot of the stuff that we moved online wasn't done with accessibility in mind. It was done with speed in mind, first and foremost. And so, yeah, as a result, the initial solutions that we had weren't necessarily accessible. It was really important then that once things kind of calm down a little bit, we go back to those technologies and make sure that they are accessible, right? The disabled population was one of the most, like, marginalized groups during COVID-19, because I guess everybody was in a panic and wasn't really thinking in an inclusive, accessible way. So yeah, so that was the effect of COVID. Of so or sorry, that was during COVID, things moved online, but we forgot about accessibility because we were in a panic. But now that we're not in that state and things are being normalized, now's the perfect time when we should be saying, okay, so we're doing this meetup online, for example. We never would have done that before COVID. So we have this meetup online. What are the things that we can do when we're doing this meetup that can make it more accessible? So things like transcripts, like live transcripts, have gotten significantly better very quickly, because with that in mind, because it's things have moved online and now we're thinking about accessibility.
Mm. Yeah, next
Great question.
question is very tied up to that as well. How did the shift to remote work and online services highlight the importance of web accessibility for individuals with disabilities?
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, so similar to what I was talking about before, just like with COVID, it just emphasizes the importance of our digital assets being accessible. And that's both like consumer facing. So, like, we're all consumers of Zoom right now because we're on Zoom, but it's also our internal tools as well. So when we're working somewhere, like, at the university, where you can upload your documents, for example, if you're at the workplace and where you upload your documents, or the chats that we use or things like that. Those tools being accessible is really important to make sure that employees can continue to engage in remote work. I'll also say that remote work is accessible, and is a lot more accessible than like the whole like return to office mandates. The return to office mandates are really disappointing for the disabled community, because remote work gives a lot of opportunity for people who want or need to have more control of their physical environment, and yeah, those kind of like remote work like opens up that opportunity for people, which so remote work is really great and that opportunity is really great, and we just want to make sure that the tools that we're using in that remote work is still allowing people to continue to engage.
Yeah, and speaking of remote work, somebody interested in what is your day-to-day working environment and responsibility as a web accessibility specialist?
Cool. So, if you want to be an accessibility specialist one day, yeah, so my job, so I do accessibility full time. A lot of people who do accessibility do it as kind of an addition to their job. So they're a BA, and either formally or informally, they do accessibility as well. So some people have two hats and some people just like do it out of passion. So what like my day-to-day often looks like I do a lot of audits, for example. There's a company, that like we'll just use grocery store because we were talking about it already. So the grocery store, they want to make sure that their website is accessible. So my expertise is knowing the requirements and knowing like the like how websites are or are not accessible. So I'll review their website for them and I'll poke around and I'll see what their things are. I'll, fill out all their forms and stuff. And then I'll write up a report and tell them, here's the things that I found, here's what's working, here's what's not. So that's a major part of what I do, and how I apply my accessibility knowledge. I do things like this, like trainings and stuff. Those are really fun to be able to talk about accessibility. And then, yeah, just like generic consulting. So like doing reviews, like, I have a client who is like as they're building something. So they're building designs. So before they finalize the designs, they run it by me, and I'll just put in Figma some tags of like, oh, did you consider this? Yeah, the list looks good. I think we should change this, that kind of thing. So yeah, so giving feedback in that way. And so whether you're doing accessibility full time or just in a part-time kind of way, giving feedback is a really easy way, if you're able to your teammates, or your colleagues or like your fellow students kind of thing. Um, yeah, but basically doing assessments, talking about accessibility, doing reviews, that kind of stuff. That's usually how I spend my time. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. So just for anyone just interested in that responsibility, follow Maya on LinkedIn. We can have able to see her amazing, inspiring, LinkedIn profile. She's very energized and give out all the amazing talk and speeches from here, like Australia, New Zealand, all over the place. Awesome.
I'm just gonna carry you around, Theora, wherever I go. You're just gonna be like my hype person. It's great.
Love it. So we have somebody just upvote a questions. Who is the best place within a tech team to advocate for accessibility?
Great question. I would say anybody. So a lot of the time on tech teams, so the answer is anybody, and a layer deeper than that is the earlier in the development life cycle as possible is like a key place to build in accessibility. So, for example, I work with a lot of QAs who are really passionate about accessibility, and they say, we want to implement accessibility, but we can't, like, it's not part of the requirements. And we bring it up, and they say, well, it's not a bug because we didn't want to build it that way in the first place. And so they're kind of stuck trying to raise it as an issue. And then so it moves up earlier in the process, and devs are like, well, it wasn't part of the requirements because, I'm building to the requirements. So then we ask, well, who's writing the requirements, right? So that's where the BAs come. That's when the product team comes in. And if those people are advocating and building accessibility into what they're doing, that has a trickle down effect to the rest of the process. If, for example, a BA is writing your requirements, I'm just using that as like the example of like, a primary task that BAs do, including in the requirements about, this feature needs to be keyboard accessible. Then it goes to the dev team and they have to build it in. Even if the devs don't do it, when it gets to QA is going to test it, and then they can fail it properly, and they have they have what they need to be able to say, no, you need to go fix it. So the earlier we can bring it up in the development lifecycle, the better it is. That concept, it's called shift left. It's the idea that if you take all the job roles in the development lifecycle and you put them, from left to right, it's the idea of taking the accessibility and shifting it from the right hand side, which is closer to the end, and shifting it left to earlier in that process. So the short answer to that is you.
Awesome. So just link a bit about business analysts, because most of us here, I would say we are business analysts or who hunting for the job in that area. So how can knowledge about accessibility help BA engage with stakeholders effectively?
Yeah, I mean, like what stakeholders are we talking about, I guess? That's where like the stats that I came up with. What I find when you're having conversations with people about accessibility, it's really valuable to know where they're coming from and what things are important to them. And that's why this presentation had like a little bit of everything. Because some people are really user centric and user focused, and if you can tell somebody how 1 in 4 people are disabled, and you focus on the user, and 71% are clicking away because they can't, that kind of thing, that can be really compelling to some people who are really focused on that. Other people are much more business minded, right? They want to know what the dollars are. They want to know, KPIs and time usage and burn downs and all that kind of stuff. And so you want to be talking to them in that way. So, talk about the increased revenues and how it increases, customer acquisition and customer retention, that kind of thing. So my recommendation when it comes to dealing with stakeholders and trying to get buy-in and getting people on your side, is understanding where they're coming from and being empathetic to where they're coming from, and sticking to your values of accessibility is important, but trying to understand what their values are and linking accessibility to that. And you're going to get a much healthier conversation listening to them as well.
Yes, yes, I agree. Because the first lesson when I study at Vic is become a BA, you have to be able to put your head on their shoes and be able to understand empathy. And also, yeah, and the best way to be accessible with them as a BA, I'd say. Awesome. We have a lot of questions as well. So we have 7 more minutes. Keep it up. Very interesting so far. So is there anywhere to keep up to date with disability stats in New Zealand?
So, disability, digital.gov.nz is a good resource in general. And they're probably they have a vested interest in keeping up to date. Stats NZ also. The stats about like the 1 in 4 stats, that's from a census that was done in 2013, I think. So it's kind of old, but I think that there was a census that was done last year. So we should be getting new stats soon, hopefully, about disability. There's also, of course, a ministry for disability. I can't remember what it's called. There's a Te Reo name for it. But if you search like New Zealand Ministry, like I think it's Office of Disabilities or Disability Rights or something like that. I feel like I should know that. Yeah, so they again have a vested interest in understanding disability in New Zealand and advocating for disability. So yeah, you can keep up to date with those
Yeah,
resources.
awesome. Before we continue, I just want to say it's wow for me again because this kind of questions we touch all of the corner around the workplace, and you will be able to like answer that in a go. That's amazing. Oh. So about mental health challenges, do we also consider
Yeah,
web accessibility for people with mental health or mental
yeah,
challenges?
that Yeah, 100%. I so agree with that. Like, the way that our mental health impacts the way that we do work, like from like migraines to just not being able to concentrate well to feeling anxious, the way that our mental health impact and that has an impact on the way that we interact with our digital products, right? Like if you're on a website where you have to fill in a form and the form doesn't make sense and it's confusing, or the labels aren't clear, or you can't see the colors, or there's an error and the error is not described properly, if you're already in a state where you're feeling anxious, and then you have errors that are not helping you, then that just makes you more anxious. And it just makes it more debilitating and or, like difficult for you to fill the form. So 100% mental health has a huge part in accessibility.
Awesome. Yes. And somebody have interested in create an app for refugee community. How can I start to incorporate the accessibility at the beginning? Good questions.
Yeah, like I mean, thinking about it already is great. So doing some learning and thinking of like honing in on what aspects of accessibility you want to do is probably my recommendation. Like I said at the top, accessibility itself covers so many different things. From forms to color to videos, right? If your app doesn't involve any videos, then maybe don't prioritize learning about accessible videos just yet, right? Because that's not directly relevant. So I would say focus in on just like 1 or 2 aspects of accessibility that you want to learn about, and then focus on those and make sure those parts are part of your app. So something like keyboard accessibility, I talk a lot about keyboard accessibility because it's very important. So say, okay, keyboard accessibility and colors, for example. Those are the 2 things that I want to focus on when I'm creating my app and when I'm doing all the other things for creating my app. So yeah, I'm just going to make sure that I'm including those. So, I might spend some time learning about them because I need to learn about them and to understand what it is. But at least you have a focus and something a little bit smaller to work towards. And then, that's an easier thing to tick off and an easier milestone to reach. So then you can move on to the next things. That's what I would recommend. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And we have 2 more to go. I just take the questions already be covered. So the next one is what is an example of accessibility in practice that may feature on a CV?
Mm. Well, so I don't know what a BA CV looks like, to be honest. So I don't know, but even being able to say like, advocated for accessibility, in product stand-ups or something like that. Um, Thinking about ways that you included accessibility in the things that you did. Um, so one is the ways that you included accessibility in the things that you were doing. So whatever your regular BA tasks are, if you were including accessibility in those things, you can say that. And then, of course, a CV is always stronger if you have like stats and numbers and proof, basically. So if you can say, we advocated for accessibility during stand-ups, and as a result, we built this feature that was accessible, or that, that was keyboard accessible, or, we changed the designs, the colors from the design because I brought this up and I educated my team or something like that. Or even things like, I ran an info session at, my workplace or my school. I ran a lunch and learn, and I talked a little bit about accessibility, and answered some questions. Again, it just shows your like that something about accessibility. You don't have to be an expert by any means. And trust me, like other people, like their accessibility is like at zero, like way down, and so knowing anything about it is already like exponentially more. So even being able to say I ran a lunch and learn, and you didn't have to be an expert at it, but the fact that you're able to say it shows that you have some expertise, that and some initiative, and community building, and communication skills that other people aren't putting into practice.
Yeah, that the fact that you be aware of it already make you stand out. That's what I get from there, right?
Yeah. One thing I would say about like don't just put accessibility on your CV just because you're like, I believe in accessibility. But like, I mean, you can say in your like intro, accessibility is something I'm passionate about. But yeah, you make sure that you are backing it up, and backing it up can simply be I'm learning about it. I'm watching videos and I'm doing reading about it, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity to be able to apply what I learned, kind of thing. But just make sure that you're backing up, what you're
Yes,
saying
great
on your CV. Yeah.
insights. That's right. And last but not least, is digital accessibility something that is generally well championed, or it is generally lacking globally or and on New Zealand?
So, I mean, everybody here is now a champion for accessibility. So we're already better off today, like, now than we were an hour ago. Um, yeah, so it's something that is there, and it still needs a lot of improvement. WebAIM, one of the resources that I showed earlier, they do, excuse me, a project called the Million Project, where they scan 1 million websites, 1 million homepages, and they pull stats from that. And so they do that every year. And 96% of homepages have accessibility issues on them. It's an average of about, like based on the number of bugs they found, it's about an average of 50 bugs per homepage. So that's not great. And so it still shows that we have a lot to do. That being said, they also show how, as homepages get more complex, meaning that there's more complicated things on it, and which ultimately means there's more opportunity for accessibility issues, the number of accessibility bugs hasn't gone up. So things are getting more complex without increasing the number of accessibility issues. And we are also seeing a lot of championing of accessibility. Sometimes it comes at the face of a lawsuit, but after that, like in Australia, Coles supermarket is a really good example of a company that got sued really publicly for accessibility, but now they're ranked at the top of accessibility in all of Australia. And they're now working on like their internal tools as well to make sure that, from front to back, they're fully accessible. Government in New Zealand is also taking a really good um, like effort at accessibility as well. A lot of government agencies have in-house accessibility teams that are working on their products. So yeah, so to answer that question, there's a lot of work left to do, but there is a lot of groundwork that's already been built there. So yeah, and now we have more champions joining us on this journey. So
Awesome. That's great. And I feel like time is already constrained there. So feel free to contact us to the channel from the chat or the email so we can collect all the questions, great questions, and send to Maya once to follow up for
Yeah.
you later.
Yeah,
Awesome.
really good questions. Yeah. Yeah.
Lovely. So
Yeah.
that's the time now, Maya. And thank you so much for sharing valuable insights on accessibility. It's like it's been very eyes-opening for me because it's very lots of facts and tips, and I have no idea. And now is a great time to start to learn about accessibility as well. And I would say everyone here did a great job by showing up and apply your first tip already. And thank you so much for everyone as well who joined us tonight. And we will upload the YouTube video on our YouTube channel. So feel free to check it out again. And if you enjoyed today's session, please spread the good word. And our next event will be in Auckland in 15th of October. This about leadership panel. So stay tuned for further details, and thanks again. And we hope to see you next time. Have a lovely evening, everyone. Thank you.